if our thoughts are the result of some random evolutionary process, why should we believe anything we think is true?
Well, the first thing is that evolution isn't a random process. But that aside, it's
let me put it this way: it's either directed by an outside intelligence or it's not.
Sure, okay, I'll give
If
you
it's not directed by an outside intelligence, then it's random.
Yes, so?
So, if it's directed by intelligence, then perhaps God exists. If it's not directed by intelligence, why should we believe anything we think?
If evil does exist, as much as that may be a problem for why a loving God would allow evil, nonetheless, it's a signpost that something beyond the material world has to exist to allow this realm of good and evil to exist.
In fact, I think Alex recognizes that signpost because on his website, he rails, I think rightfully, against some of the abuses of the Roman Catholic Church, where he talks about how priests have sexually abused children, and obviously that's a great wrong. But my question is, Alex, if you really think that is a great wrong, why would you deny objective morality? I mean, is that really wrong, or is it just a matter of personal opinion?
Well, I think that we agree in one sense that evil doesn't necessarily disprove God. I'm with you on that. What I would say is to answer your question, objectively, no. It is a subjective thing. Morality, to me, is entirely subjective.
Why do you say that?
Well, because, firstly, a thing to note is that objective morality... Well, let's talk about what objective actually means, I suppose. Objectivity, to me, if you want my definition, would be to say that it is true regardless of human intervention, regardless of human consciousness. For instance, the Earth orbits the Sun. That would be true if all humans disappeared.
Right.
Every single one of them. It would still be an objective fact. But to say that murder is wrong, if every human disappeared, that couldn't still be wrong, surely. That would be a nonsense concept without some kind of human psychology. The only way that you could argue that perhaps it would still be wrong is if there was some kind of transcendent being. But then you need to have that being in order to prove the existence of the objective morality that you're then using to prove the God. So
but what we're doing is we're reasoning from effect to cause, that we have this effect known as this moral law that is pressing on us. As you admitted in the video, and look, videos, 2-minute videos, 10-minute videos, you can't expound on all the nuances. So if this is wrong, correct me. But you seem to say that in fact, I think you quoted, the quote was, let me just quote you accurately on this, because in the video you said this, you said moral truths are so deeply ingrained in us that they feel like they are objective.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so my question is, why would you doubt they're objective if they're so deeply ingrained in us?
Well, because this is where I think Sam Harris is right, in the sense that if you have certain assumptions, so let's say that we could assume that human well-being was a good thing. We'll discuss why shortly, but let's say we assumed that. We could then say that it is objectively true that we should act in certain ways, for instance, trying not to murder people. And that would then become an objective morality.
Right.
So because evolution has instilled within us, through genetics, a drive to stay alive, then we can derive objective moral truths about how we should act in order that complies with this inner nature, which I think has come about through evolution. So even if you don't subscribe to the idea that certain moral actions, such as not killing or not stealing, have come about through evolution, the instinctual nature within us to stay alive causes us to think of those as objective truths. But it's a technicality. So for all intents and purposes, you could say they're objective truths. If you grab 100 people off the street and ask them, is rape wrong? 100 of them will say yes. But that doesn't mean it's objective. I mean, for instance, I put it to you, would you say that chocolate is tasty?
Yeah, I would, but that's a subjective...
Right, sure.
Some people may not like chocolate.
It's subjective.
Yeah.
That's
a flavor.
So tar can be just as tasty as chocolate. But that's no problem, right? That's no problem whatsoever. So when you say something along the lines of, so morality is subjective. So what Hitler did being wrong was just an opinion. Well, yes, but in the same sense that chocolate tasting as good as tar is an opinion.
See, I think when
it doesn't make a difference.
Well, no, I think it does, because it's much more obvious that, say, sexually abusing children is wrong, then atheism's true.
Right.
So why would you say that atheism's true in order to avoid the obvious conclusion that sexually abusing children is wrong? You already know sexually abusing children is wrong. Now, if you want to use an evolutionary argument, the problem is that undercuts everything you think. Because if everything we think is the product of evolution, the product of the laws of physics or biology or whatever it is, then why should we believe anything we think? Forget about morality for a second. Why should we even believe that atheism's true or that Christianity's true? If we're completely... I'm sorry, I'm suffering from jet lag here. If our thoughts are the result of some random evolutionary process, why should we believe anything we think is true?
Well, the first thing is that evolution isn't a random process. But that aside, it's
let me put it this way: it's either directed by an outside intelligence or it's not.
Sure, okay. I'll give
If
you
it's not directed by an outside intelligence, then it's random.
Yes.
So, if it's directed by intelligence, then perhaps God exists. If it's not directed by intelligence, why should we believe anything we think?
Because I mean, this is the old argument from against naturalism that people like
C.S. Lewis
and indeed modern practitioners like Plantinga have put forward, which, as I understand it, is effectively saying if evolution, if effectively it's meant for the propagation of our DNA, it's not aimed at us receiving true beliefs. It's not aimed at us actually. It's not aimed at reasoning.
No,
and ultimately, you could even go as far as to say that the actual processes of matter in motion, atoms banging into each other, electrochemical processes, those are non-rational. Why would we assume that they produce rational thinking? Because ultimately, I mean, and your argument here, I guess, Frank, is it undercuts the whole project.
It's this idea.
Of
it's almost sort of existential. You know, why should we believe anything if there's no guidance? To me, it's like asking the question, like you said earlier, about, you know, how do we know that we even exist, or that the universe wasn't created last Thursday? For me, it's somewhat based on consensus. It doesn't prove it's true, but reason is one of those things that we need to assume in order to get anywhere. In the same sense, we need to assume that we exist in order to have a philosophical discussion.
No, that's a very wise point. I agree with you. The question is, how do we explain reason on a naturalistic worldview?
Well, reason and consciousness can be explained as coming about through evolution. The way in which we sense the world.
But let's stop there for just a second, though, Alex. If that's the case, why should we trust it?
Oh, well, we don't necessarily have to. Again, it's a subjective thing. But every single person...
But that would mean reason's subjective.
Yes, it is.
Well, if reason is subjective, then...
If reason's not subjective, then how do you and I come to different conclusions, both using reason?
Because we have free will. If reason's subjective, we couldn't even communicate. If there weren't these objective, unchanging laws of logic...
well, yes, there are objective rules and tenets of reason, but reason itself is subjective in the same way that morality, you can say, under certain assumptions, there are objective truths about morality. If you have a certain assumption about reason, then yes, there are objective tenets.
Well, that's what I mean. These immaterial laws of logic that aren't made of molecules, how do we explain those on a naturalistic worldview?
How do you mean? How do we explain?
Why are there laws of logic? Why are there laws of mathematics?
They're a product of consciousness. And laws of mathematics are not a thing in themselves, but rather a way to explain the universe. So the laws of mathematics would not exist without human beings, so they are subjective. But the things that they describe would.
Oh, no, hold on.
So when you talk about logic, when you talk about reason, these things aren't ends, they're means. They're means to understanding certain things. So we use reason to understand that the Earth goes around the sun. We use the laws of maths to understand how that happens.
But you just said the laws of mathematics are human conceptions, basically.
Yes, it's a language.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. Let's say there were no human beings on the Earth and there were just two rocks on the Earth. Was it true there were just two rocks on the Earth?
Well, it depends what you mean by two. I mean, sure, like if
in the everyday sense of the word.
This is where things get confusing, because, for instance, I suppose what you're asking is something similar to the question of, does 2 + 2 still equal 4 if there are no humans? And to me, the case is you have to think about what you're describing when you say 2 + 2. So, for instance, if you're saying if there were 2 rocks and you added 2 more rocks, would there be 4 rocks? Absolutely. But to say that 2 + 2 = 4 is like is a good way to bring in the idea that mathematics is a language, because in the same way that I can say...
But it's not an arbitrary language.
Well, it is.
In fact, language itself is based on mathematics, and that's not arbitrary.
I'd say it's absolutely arbitrary.
Math is arbitrary?
No, math isn't, but the language we use to describe it is. It evolves and changes.
Well, yes, but they're referencing objective facts. If we want to call this one book, there is only one book here.
Yes.
Okay, that's an objective fact. If we wanted to call it eins, like in Deutsch, that this is one book, okay, that's a different word, but it's representing the same objective fact. And if we're going to say that reasoning is objective, then there's no way we can come to any conclusions about anything.
There are different ways, even within the laws of mathematics.
Did I say objective or subjective? Yes.
I don't recall that.
If we're going to say reason is subjective, then there's no way we can come to any conclusions about anything. But that's self-defeating, because when I say that, I'm making a truth claim. That if reason is subjective, then we can't come to any true conclusions about anything. That actually is an objective truth claim.
Well, I would say that even with something as objective as maths, there are subjective ways in which to understand it, the language we use, even though it seems that it wouldn't be the case. For instance, if you want to find the roots of a quadratic equation, you can do it by using the quadratic formula, you can do it by expanding the brackets, and you get to the same answer. But the reason you're using to get there is subjective. So the answer is a fact of nature, it's true. That would still be the answer, even if humans didn't exist. But the language we use to get there, and the reason that we use to get there, wouldn't.
Yeah, but the reason is objective, but there's different levels here. You have ontology, which is the study of being.
Sure.
Okay. You have epistemology, that's how we know the study of being. Then you might have semantics, which is how you describe the epistemology to get to the ontology.
Sure.
This can be arbitrary, but it's still tethered to objective facts. It's ultimately tethered to an objective ontology.
So what are the tenets of objective reason to you?
Well, start with the basic laws of logic, that they're...
For instance...
The law of the excluded middle, things like that.
Law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle, law of inference, law of identity. Those are the essentials of the laws of logic. And you start with those, and then you use your sense perceptions to draw conclusions about the real world using those tools, those objective laws of logic.
They're tools, and this is the thing that I see when we're talking about whether reason exists. Reason is a method, and so it
helps us in epistemology, but if they weren't tethered ontologically, if they weren't tethered to reality, there'd be no way we could know anything about reality.
You're making the claim that this realm exists that we call the laws of logic and so on, and that it really is something that we discover in that sense. It's an element of the reality we live in.
We don't determine them; we discover them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas you're making the case, obviously, Alex,
that reason is not something we discover.
Produce. It's something we invent because it helps us.
But you see, that's an objective truth claim right there. That's why it's self-defeating. Alex is saying it's objectively true that reason is subjective.
And the same applies to the moral argument as well, which is you're saying there's this realm of real right and wrong, good and evil, and you're saying, no, these are just concepts we invent. We don't discover them, but we invent them. And I know many people part of whose journey to belief in God has been based on the fact that they came to the view that there really is a realm of right and wrong that I discover. I no longer believe that it's all subjective. And obviously others who take your view as well, Alex. I mean, fundamentally, is that where we just come to an impasse where you say, Frank, there is real realms of, these objective laws of logic, and there's real realm of good and evil, and you just say, no, in my opinion, it can all be explained as a subjective. Because ultimately, I believe in objective moral good and evil,